video. Yes, hello, this is Daniel and Jennifer Fitzgerald. I'm posting a video on YouTube. I'll post one a little later about something else. Posting this video on YouTube within the next 15 or 20 minutes. I would like to advise Canadians that we have some dirty, filthy police here in Ottawa, Canada. One of them's hacking our iPhone, and he's doing it at nighttime while we're watching movies and putting it on pause, my wife and I, Jennifer Fitzgerald and Daniel Fitzgerald. And he keeps putting clocks on our screen, over our screen, even on airplane mode. And he's got a map of Canada and the United States, and it's even got like a big line through it to indicate that it's nighttime here, like a V-shaped line, indicating what time of night, that it's at nighttime or daytime. And he keeps putting it in his map. He has Canada and the United States in black and orange dots. And he's posting on the map a orange circle around Ottawa with a white circumference circle on the outside with an orange dot on that's covering Vancouver. Okay, this is particularly a threat against me. Okay, this is what it is. My wife and I haven't lived in British Columbia since 2006. And I got a real problem with what this ass is doing. Excuse me, YouTube. I'd like to remind people out there in a short video, and remind Canada that you had your federal government, including the opposition, Poilievre, Trudeau, Singh, former leaders of the Conservative Party, Mr. Scheer, and Mr. O'Toole. All of these men covered up every criminal act against my wife and I in Ontario and Quebec and BC. I'd like to remind the federal government that you're guilty of criminal offenses under Canada's criminal code, all of you on Parliament Hill, and you know why. And I'd like to explain this to people that might watch the video. First of all, your government of Canada, the Liberals and the Conservatives, they're aware that organized crime in a hospital in BC, known as Grace Hospital, where our daughter, Lara Danielle Fitzgerald, was born on July 17, 2006. There were 2 attempts on her life in the hospital. The assailant, who we believe to be a woman named Sarah Small, a former social worker of the hospital, who had access to our child and hated my wife and I, committed these crimes. Okay, we're fairly certain of it. Because her office door was located 10 feet from where someone went in to our little girl. She was in an incubator in a room in the hospital, and subsequently this person went in. The ward was empty, and Miss Small's office was approximately 10 feet from the door entry into this ward, where our daughter was by herself in an incubator. She had jaundice. They had a blue-burn light over her. Subsequently, we went to visit her, as we did every day back in 2006 in July. And as we walked down the hallway, well, we went in and we asked where our daughter was. She wasn't where she should be. They said she was in another ward under a blue-burn light. She had jaundice from too many TPNs, okay? And so they told us where to go. So we went down this hallway. As we went down this hallway to a door that opened up into another ward for newborn children, we noted on our left side was a door, an office door. The door was open, the light was on, and there was a plaque on the door that said Sarah Small, okay? And that door was 5 feet away from the door of entry in the ward where our daughter was by herself, no other babies in the entire ward. And so we went through that door and went to the nurse's station. We rang the bell several times, waited 10 minutes. There was no nurse, there was no staff, no other children there, and then the nurse suddenly shows up, takes us to the room where our daughter is. We look in through the windows, and our daughter's temperature on her incubator was 104.9. I think it was 96 degrees. She was screaming and crying in the incubator. We ran in and we opened up all the port windows, okay? Worse than that, BC's Grace Hospital covered up an attempt on our child's life. Someone pulled her catheter out. She was born at 4 pounds, I think it was 4 pounds, 2 ounces. And someone pulled her catheter out and the hospital covered it up and never told us. My wife says it was 4.4, okay? We found out about this 6 months later, after, or 7 or 8 months later after we'd left BC, okay, with our daughter, all right? Then in 2009, I was in jail in Toronto for threatening Premier Dalton McGuinty to murder him. I had threatened him in 2008 by email. I was drunk and intoxicated. And then they illegally brought me to Toronto. I was in Nova Scotia. And they illegally had me transferred from New Brunswick to Toronto, which was illegal because it was a provincial offense. They had no jurisdiction to transfer me to Toronto, and New Brunswick broke the law, okay? And then while I was in jail for 10 months, there were 2 counts of them trying to murder me. The first time around, they put these bald, skin-headed Nazis that were guards on the 2nd floor of the East Detention Center in Toronto. They put a gas barbecue above my cell on the roof, and they played German polka music in the vent of my cell. I could hear it through the vent. And I was getting really sick, and because the carbon monoxide from the barbecue was coming into my cell, okay, I had to breathe through a toilet paper roll at the bottom of my door. When that failed, they sent in 2 mafia figures from Quebec with French accents. They poisoned my breakfast. I got really, really sick. I was screaming for help. I was dizzy. The room was spinning in a 360-degree circle. I banged on my door. The guard came up, answered my door. He told me to fuck off, and he slammed the door in my face, and he threw a pail of water on me, okay? Then when lunchtime came, they told the inmate next door, an African Canadian, we're going to send you to another range because there's going to be a problem here in about 2 hours. They were going to poison my lunch to finish me off, okay? And then, but I didn't, I flushed it down the toilet. In 2017, my wife we were living on Chapel Street here in Ottawa. My wife went for a walk down Montreal Road to a cross section of the Parkway, the Vanier Parkway. So she went to cross her crosswalk, and as she walked across the crosswalk, a Ottawa police marked car pulled out of traffic, hit the pedal, tried to run my wife over with intent. My wife, he didn't have his emergency lights on or anything, nothing. He just pulled out and aimed right for her and hit the pedal. And then my wife came home shaking, crying. She told me she told me she was going to report it to the police, and she told me that she would not go out unless I accompanied her. Okay, and then she did file a report with the Ottawa Police Service. I heard her talking to them on the phone. They told her they would find the car and driver. This is after she made a handwritten letter of all the events that took place. And 2 weeks later, this apparent independent police investigation unit calls my wife, and it's on speaker. And this guy suddenly tells her, Mrs. Fitzgerald, there was no such car or driver, after they said 2 weeks before that they would find the car and driver. My wife went to Google to see if there was cameras at the intersection. There was, and after she went in, she got blocked, and she couldn't get in there again. They blocked her from seeing if there was cameras at that intersection. Okay, so, and plus your federal government using neo-Nazi skinheads in the police in Quebec. They attacked our boat, Jacob Scotia. We were sleeping to put water in our fuel tank. They tried to accuse me of threatening a mayor in 212 in Lacolle, Quebec. They had no evidence, nothing. They arrested me. I asked the officer, where's your evidence? Please show me your evidence, where I called your mayor and threatened him, because our boat was being vandalized in a boatyard, our first boat, okay? And the owner that was doing it was involved with the Hells Angels. They were drug dealers, Le Sire de Champlain Marina. And the Hells Angel that was involved in this was the fire chief of the town of Lacolle, in with the mayor. His name was Sean Major, okay? And the police know all about him. Well, he was buddy-buddy with the police. He showed up with the police to kick my wife off our Bayliner in 2012. Him and his police friends and their biker tow truck showed up, okay? So I just want to let the public know that, look, Canada, look, Parliament Hill, you've covered up Trudeau, Poilievre, and the rest of you, Stephen Harper. You've all acted to cover up these crimes against my wife and I and our 2 children. Let me think now, how did this start? Yes, in 2018, we wanted to take our case to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. I got into contact with the Dutch government in New York City. They asked me to send them a list of the allegations against Canada. There were a number of allegations against Canada: police terrorism, illegal hacking of our 10 phones, and destruction of 8 laptops, doing this covertly. At that time, 5 counts of attempted murder, 2 on our daughter, 2 on me, and 1 on my wife. Okay. Constant threats of arrest. The police pulling over when my wife's walking down sidewalks, and as she walks by, they pull right over and see her coming in her mirrors on the sidewalk. She walks by them, they crane their neck at her, giving her a dirty look, and then look at their databases, trying to scare her. So we explained our allegations to the Dutch government in 2018-19. In New York, they told us to call back in 2 weeks. We wanted to take our case to the High Commission of Human Rights. Okay. And when I called them back 2 weeks later, they told me that our case could not go to the High Commission of Human Rights. Our case had to go to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. They had already contacted the office of the prosecutor. They sent my communications to them, to the prosecutor's office. They gave my wife and I the address of the prosecutor, Ms. Basuda, and told us to email as much as we could by memory and to provide as much evidence as we could to the ICC. We started emailing the ICC according to the requests of the Dutch government. We sent them 30 emails of detailed evidence and oral statements against Canada's government and security, and we weren't getting any responses. We called overseas. The receptionist at the courthouse put me on hold in the prosecutor's office. She came back on the phone and told me they never received any emails from us. The Trudeau government had the police following us. We sent letters also to Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II, twice. I called Buckingham Palace, explained the situation. They told us to send the Queen the evidence or send a letter that it would be a priority, and that they would definitely look for our letter due to the fact that Canada covered up the attempted murder of our newborn, which is the reason why. I was in tears on the phone, by the way, for my audiences. We wanted to send the evidence. We asked the palace if we could send it by courier to the Queen, the package that we had of evidence, and they checked and said their security could not accept packages at the gate. And it was nice of them to do that. Subsequently, we sent Queen Elizabeth 2 of the same letters in 2019. They never received them. Trudeau's RCMP captured the letters. We called the office of the British ambassador to the UN Security Council, Mary Pierce, at that time in New York City. I spoke to her assistant, Jacob. I asked if we could send Ms. Pierce a copy of the letters we sent the Queen. We also sent former President Donald Trump a letter as well. That letter was hidden by Mike Pence, the vice president, because Trudeau was on the phone all weekend with him, because Trudeau had my wife followed to the post office, and that he knew when she was sending the letter to the White House. He had Pence ready to snatch the letter when Trump left for Europe. I can't get into extensive explanations of this. These are just briefs. The letters to Mary Pierce never made it there. They were sent back to us as undeliverable. Her office staff, because I called, looked around for the letters for 2 or 3 weeks to see when they would come. They never arrived. I was told that Her Majesty the Queen, I was assured when she got our letter that she would respond within 3 months of receiving it. We never got a response. Buckingham never got the letters. Okay? We gave a ton of evidence to the Russian embassy here, a package. The RCMP were hacking my laptop at 330 Wilbrod Street when I was writing the documentation for the Security Council. My wife and I took it to the Russian embassy, a great big huge package of evidence, and we asked them if they could give it to the Security Council to see if the Security Council would take a look and forward a letter to the ICC requesting an investigation against the Canadian government. Our 2 boats, Jacob's Goshen, Jacob's Ladder, as well as our Bayliner, were all attacked, stolen from us. Vandalism committed at nighttime by bald-headed Nazi skinheads in the Quebec Provincial Police. The Quebec Provincial Police in 2012, when they were attacking my boat, I found out that the mayor of Lacolle was involved with a Hells Angel named Sean Major, who were involved with the owners of Le Sieur de Champlain Marina, a man named Leduc, and another one named Charles. These 4 were attacking our boat in the yard. Okay, and when I found out that this piece of dog feast shit was working for the mayor of Lacolle, Mr. Yves Deteau, I called Mary Duto's office and started raising my voice on the phone and telling him I'm going to come down there and confront him about it. He handed the recordings over to the local provincial police department. When I went to I told the police I was going to file evidence of the vandalism against our boat. We had photographs. We had a journal we had written every night. We had taken photographs of footsteps around our boat, which match Charles, the owner of the marina, in the snow. We had photographs of the vandalism against our boat, the tarp being tore off, holes drilled in the transom. Charles took a grinder one morning and grinded a hole in the front of my boat with his grinder as he's calling me to come over at 7:30 in the morning. We gave all this evidence to the police when I took it in. I told them that the 8x11 color photographs would be ready. They were in town being developed from our digital camera. I came in a few days later, they arrested me and told me I had threatened the mayor. When I sat down with this undercover dirty policeman and I said to him, "Where's your evidence that I threatened the mayor? Please play the recording for me," he refused to. Subsequently, they stuck me illegally in an ambulance. They took me to St. John's Hospital. This dirty policeman and another law enforcement official named LeBoeuf, okay, a uniformed one, stood outside the door. I was forced to get changed out of my clothes. This officer who arrested me back then in the police station when I brought in our evidence, he was standing outside the hospital room door where I was forced to get changed, and he said to me, "It's over for you now, Fitzgerald." So I just looked at him and said, "Oh, really?" They sent me up to the psychiatric ward. I was set up with 3 corrupted psychiatrists. I didn't say a word to them, nothing, okay? And I got a lawyer, and I had to appear, unfortunately, in mental health court before a Judge Bedard of the St. John Sur Richelieu Palace of Justice. The judge talked to my wife, and he talked to me for about 15 minutes. And then he got really mad, and then he said to me, as far as I can remember, he said, "Mr. Fitzgerald, do you mind if I speak to your attorney in French? It's easier for me." And I said, "Sure, Your Honor, no problem." So he said something to my lawyer, some sentences, and he looked at the other lawyer, who, by the way, the other lawyer, you know who he was working for? Heenan Blakey, Mr. Chrétien's law firm. He was a subcontractor from a law firm called Magali in Montreal, contracted by Heenan Blakey, owned by a liberal. Okay, do you see the Heenan Blakey, owned by Chrétien? They were the legal representation for the hospital. So they subcontracted my case to a lawyer from a company called Magali. Okay, and he was the one representing the hospital to try and keep me in there for 30 more days. So I'm briefing you people because I want the public to know, and like I keep telling Trudeau, I call his office, I tell him, "Look, you're a scumbag, Mr. Trudeau, you're a criminal. You've all covered up crimes against my wife," and I'd like to tell all of you, there's been probably 200 crimes committed against my wife and I in the past 18 years, and by the police and the provincial government of Quebec, as well as Ontario, okay, and also the criminal acts covered up by the former Liberal government of the province of BC under Gordon Campbell, who covered up and told the hospital hush hush on the attempted murders of our newborn. Okay, we've been to President of the United States. I left so many messages with the Obama White House comment line and Joe Biden. I left comments also at the White House for President Trump. I made 8,000 phone calls to the State Department during the time that Hillary Rodham Clinton was Secretary of State, as well as John Kerry and Max Tillerson, and also Mr. Pompeo. Okay, I've made endless calls to the UN. Okay, so I'm just telling the public that, look, Trudeau, and this is a message for you and your opposition, my friend. Okay, I'm going to nail you people. You're all criminals. You all covered up heinous criminal acts against my wife. And I also would like to report that for the last 5 years, we've lived in Ottawa peaceably. We haven't committed any crimes. We haven't threatened anyone. I certainly have not went up and threatened to kill anyone or anything like that. It's never been in my character to ever threaten a person's life. I made a mistake once. I was drunk and intoxicated at a computer and sent Dalton McGuinty an email because they took our little girl, Children's Aid. They were hurting her. They were trying to blackmail us. It's just really disgraceful, and I don't really want to mention any more about it to the public. But my wife and I have a right. There's two sides to every story. Mr. Trudeau and his federal government also told CTV News not to do an interview with my wife and I. Had we been able to do an interview with CTV News and let the Canadian public know what happened to us, then Canadians would be outraged, okay? Also, it would stop the rumors that the government has spread around about my wife and I's characters. The Canadian people would know the truth. And plus, I will say to all people, listen to me, please. If our case went public in the media, and this is the reason why your government on Parliament Hill, all of them need it, hush, hush. Because if you Canadians found out everything they did to my wife and I, you would come here in the hundreds of thousands and you would go on Parliament Hill and you'd hang them if you found out what they did to us. And if you think what happened to the freedom protesters was terrible, and so do I, it was terrible. What happened to us is 100-fold worse, 100,000 times worse than what happened to them. And that's about all I have to say. I think it's time to come forward. I warn you, Mr. Prime Minister, and I'm going to give you a warning now, Justin, okay? I will make sure, Mr. Prime Minister, every single person in this city sees all my signs that I'm going out with. Every single embassy, Mr. Prime Minister. And I will sit at these embassies outside, Mr. Prime Minister, in the cold rain. I will do whatever it takes, Mr. Prime Minister, to have you and your entire government removed from power and your opposition. Listen to me, Canadians. Poilievre is dog shit, okay? Trudeau is dog shit. And they all sleep together, and they're fooling you on the news cameras. Your government on Parliament Hill, they are all illegal. They have all committed high treason against you. They have isolated a number of you across the country using Nazi skinhead balls to intimidate you. They're having dirty police hack you on your phones. Those of you like us who have this kind of evidence or similar evidence against the state, they are blocking you, they are threatening you. They go under the table and they destroy your characters throughout the judicial system. They destroy your characters throughout the country. They will reach abroad with their corrupted, dirty, disgusting fingers on Parliament Hill, all of them. They will use every kind of favor from the G7, the international community. They will blackmail embassies here, or they will bribe them. If you give embassies any evidence here because you want an embassy to represent you, to send a letter to the International Criminal Court because you feel you have a case where the Canadian government has violated the Rome statutes. And I suggest any of you out there see my videos who think, and you freedom protesters, and that's another thing, did your lawyers, freedom protesters, Miss Litch, did your lawyer, Mr. What's his name, Lawrence Greenspan, did he happen to tell you that you have evidence for a case against Canada at the International Criminal Court? I suggest you Canadians who've had criminal acts committed against you by this filthy cockroach liberals, conservatives, and NDP, and all their corrupted mafia gangsters and Nazi skinheads in the police across our country. If any of you have had criminal acts against you, you need to go and read up on Articles 6, 7, and 8 of the Rome Statute, okay? Your government covered up our case because there would be warrants out for the arrest of your entire government on Parliament Hill. I'd like to remind Mr. Trudeau and you, Poilievre, and you, Singh, and the Bloc leader, it is a criminal offense to cover up crimes on behalf of elected officials on Parliament Hill. All of you covered up the crimes against my wife and I. All of you. That's a criminal offense, Mr. Prime Minister. And you and your colleagues only have immunity in Canada because you've corrupted all the police and the courts to give you immunity. I'd like to tell you, Canadians, that what your government's done. You don't know, do you? I hope as many of you see this video as possible. Did you know your government does not have, your governments of Canada, including the filthy provinces, they're filthy liberal, conservative, and NDP underlings, your premiers, they do not have diplomatic immunity under the criminal laws of Canada. None. They've given themselves criminal immunity, folks, because they've corrupted all the police forces with Italian mafia, Hells Angels, neo-Nazi skinheads, and other low forms of life. Okay? And all of these gangsters in security across your country are all giving your filthy premiers, elected by gangs and thugs, okay? Money laundering gangs and thugs have put all your premiers and prime ministers in office, okay? Brian Mulroney, corrupt and dirty. Jean Chrétien, corrupt and dirty. Harper, a tyrant. A tyrant. Worse than Trudeau. A tyrant. Okay? A tyrant. What kind of conservative people like Poilievre and Harper? And I'm partially Jewish. There's my menorah right there. It's lit. You can see it. Okay? Very religious Jew. What kind of conservative bastards people? Bastards from hell. Devils. Support Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, who murdered over 30,000 Palestinian women, children, the unborn. Oh, I forgot, that's right. These guys don't mind babies being murdered in your hospitals. They cover it up for all their biker friends. Didn't you know that? Well, I think you should know. And you people on Parliament Hill, you listen to me and you know who I am. Let me tell you something, folks. You know how many times I've called Trudeau's office in the past 5 years, 6 years? I don't know, 300 or 400 times. You know how many times I called Poilievre, your buddy? All of you love this piece of shit, Poilievre, and O'Toole and the other moron, Scheer. You know how many times I called them, their offices? Offered them all the evidence to kick Trudeau out. You know that? You people in Canada know that I called Poilievre, his office on Parliament Hill. I called Andrew Scheer, I called O'Toole. You know what I told them? Well, I said in messages to him, I said, look, gentlemen, you come to my house, knock on my door. My wife and I will serve you a cup of coffee, Mr. Poilievre. I'll give you the folder of evidence against the Liberals who did all this to us to begin with. And you can repent to God and say you're sorry, you and Harper, for helping the Liberals to kill my wife and I in Quebec. Oh, they tried. Do you know what they were going to do to my wife in Quebec? You know what the police were going to do? They had a plan for my wife. They were going to throw a dead body on my wife and charge her with murder in Quebec. That's right. Really, Stevie Wonder, you got anything to say, Stephen Harper? Would you like to remain silent, Mr. Former Prime Minister? Or how about you scumbags on Parliament Hill, alias murders of little babies? Or would you like to continue hiding under the skirts of your lawyers, males with skirts on? Would you like to keep hiding under them? That's right, I forgot, Canada. You know what, with Parliament Hill here, you see, the rule is gangsters don't talk, eh? You know that, eh? Do you Canadian people realize all these men on Parliament Hill have been fooling you? You realize that none of them are legal. All of them have committed crimes against my wife, and I covered them up with their security and their connections on the streets. All of your police as little recruited street thugs. Okay? My wife has been assaulted twice downtown by men she doesn't even know, hurting her. She's had people downtown in stores, undercover government officials with their phones. Right? She lines up in Dollarama, or she lines up at a food bank, or she, goes into Loblaws or whatever, right? She's standing in the lineup, and they send some government piece of shit down to her, standing right across from her on his phone, staring at her while he's punching things into his phone. Oh, you people of Ottawa don't know about these things, eh? Well, of course you don't. It's all covert. How could you possibly know? My wife has been followed by douchebags, okay, insulting her on the streets. One guy that lives on, what's that street, Jen? Wernberg? One guy that lives on Wernberg and Rito. Yeah, the guy's following my wife down the street, making fun of her, okay, talking to her, harassing her, okay. And she's coming home complaining to me. This guy's following her. He follows her to Loblaws, harassing her when she comes out, following her up the street, calling her names and all kinds of things. I wanted to strangle him. You know that? I told my wife, I bought 2 walkie-talkies. Let me show them to you, folks. You think I'm kidding? There's one right there. There's the other one there. See them? I bought these walkie-talkies with this guy on Wurtemberg. And I told my wife, I bought them. It cost me $120. Now listen to this. So I told my wife to take the walkie-talkie downtown with her. She did. And I said to her, the next time you see this guy on Nurmemburg bothering you, Jen, you let me know on the walkie-talkie. You follow him. And I want to know I want to report on his exact location every 50 feet. And I'm coming right now. And I'll be there in 5 minutes. Okay? Then you know what happened? My wife came home one day, and you know what she said? The Ottawa Police Service was at Nurmemberg's building. You know why? Because he is one of their recruits, you see. They hired him to harass my wife. Aren't they dirty? Aren't you dirty? You police must be proud of yourselves, eh? You and the filthy Mounties. And then let me tell you folks something else. When I was taking evidence to the Russian consulate in 2019, I was typing it up. The RCMP were hacking my laptop. Oh yeah, you wouldn't believe the stuff they can do to your laptop by remote, folks. You would not believe what they can do to you through access to the internet here. All the Wi-Fi cafes that have no passcode. They can actually hack your laptop the minute you try to go onto a Wi-Fi station and your signal goes through the box, for example, at Starbucks, or Second Cup, or the GOAT on Friel and Wilbrod law enforcement. That reminds you of anything. My wife, listen to this. In 2019, my wife bought a printer. It was on sale. It was on sale at Shoppers Drug. It was $39, a little Canon printer, because she knew I was going to print up our case on my laptop at our building at 330 Wilbrod. So she goes to Shoppers Drug. She buys me the printer. She's carrying it home in a big box. It says Canon on the side of it, right? Well, you know what happened? 2 police and Mark Carr saw her. They followed her. She got scared. She goes around a corner down to a side street, okay, and she starts walking up the street. They followed her. One of them pulled up in front of her on the same side of the street she was walking up. She was really scared. And the cop turns his head at her, gives her a dirty look, and looks at his database. Why? They were angry at her for buying the printer. Okay? Then I started typing up everything. They did everything they could to hack my laptop. I mean, they did everything they could to destroy what I was writing. So what I was doing is I'd write like 50 or 60 pages of what happened to each of our boats, the details, okay, of what the police were doing with their biker friends, you know, on the streets to our boats. And I'd take the package up to the Russian embassy, you know, and I'd buzz them at their gate on Charlotte, and I'd say, okay, I have another package, I'd like to throw it through. Is that okay? They said sure. They even had a few officials come out and talk to me, okay? I said to one official, would you please get this material to the UN Security Council? And this man was in his 50s. He said, we might just do that. I never heard from them since. Quite frankly, I go to their embassy, they just ignore me. Isn't that terrible? I gave them a photograph of our little girl in the catheter dock. And yes, we have evidence. Someone pulled a catheter on our daughter. And I'd like you people to know, do you know what her file number was? At the hospital where they pulled her catheter out? 13171. Does 13 not mean bad luck and death? I'm sorry. Do you know how many times they've used 13 on my wife and I here? In our bank accounts, on our phone. Do you know how many times we've been threatened on our phone with arrest? Do you know the police can hack your keypad? Yeah, they can interfere with your writing. What they do is they use the auto correction in your keypad. They can go through your auto correction on your iPhone or an Android, right? They can hack in, and when you're writing the words, like when you're sending an email and you're writing the words up, they can actually stick words in there. Like they'll use abbreviations, you know, like AR, arrest, stuff like that, like different kind. I've had a few, like I use the word indeed, and they'll hack, and when I write indeed, it turns into dead, you're dead. Okay? Stuff like that. So I'm taking all these packages to the Russian consulate, right? And I type them up, I make copies, and then I package them and take it to the Russian consulate on Charlotte Street, okay? So the final package I was delivering, I walked up to the Russian consulate on a nice sunny day in 2019. Lo and behold, there's 2 RCMP marked cars in front of the consulate, okay? And one of the guys standing in an RCMP uniform in front of the Russian consulate is a pale white tall bald, a Nazi. Matching the description of the Nazi balds, tried to gas me with a barbecue in the East Detention Center in Toronto, and there was a whole bunch of them there as guards, trying to gas me with a barbecue on the roof while playing German polka music in the vent of my cell. This was all reported, by the way, to the Israeli consulate here. In 2019-20, I contacted these, because I'm partially Jewish, I contacted the Israeli embassy in Washington. I spoke with a woman there named Rachel. And after I told her what had happened, she called, what she did was she said she would email the Israeli, she said, you have to go to the Israeli consulate in Ottawa. She said to me, not here, Washington. She said, there's nothing we can do. She said to me, I'll send an email to the Israeli consulate. I said, thank you, I really appreciate it. Shalom, God bless, right? So after she did that, that same day, I got a phone call from Ambassador Nimrod Barkin himself of the Israeli consulate. You know what he said to me on the phone? He said, is this Mr. Fitzgerald? I said, yes. He said, Mr. Fitzgerald, I want you to bring your evidence down to our embassy. We're going to look at it. And I was delighted. So it would have taken me about a week to get it all together. So I got the package together, and then I called the embassy to make an appointment. And I was calling them. I figured they had taken the case on, possibly. They probably would. So I was also calling to report an event that had occurred between the time I'd initially contacted their consulate in Washington and Nimrod Barkin contacted me. So I called, and I got transferred to Israeli security. You know what they said to me? They said that I was not allowed to bring any of my documents to the embassy. Imagine that, eh? Here I have a document showing my daughter's catheter was pulled by a female gangster in Grace Hospital named Sarah Small, who's the #1 suspect, okay? She hated my wife and I, this woman, and she wore biker rings on her fingers. And, you know, we have the catheter document, okay? And it's got 13171 on it. And I say again to you folks, I can't count all the times the numeral 13 has been used against my wife and I and our child. So this bald-headed cop went there to the Russian consulate. They were intimidating the Russians for accepting our evidence. Trudeau was doing that, and as we're giving them evidence, Trudeau goes public and accuses the Russian Federation of breaking into a COVID lab. It was in the news. That was a lie. He did it because of my wife and I, because of them accepting our evidence. He pulled the same garbage with the Chinese consulate. They accepted our package too, but you see, I was talking to these consulates on the phone before it come down. The RCMP were listening in, you see. And they were briefing Trudeau. Trudeau got angry because these consulates, the Chinese consulate and the Russian consulate, were willing to accept our evidence. In 2018-19, I contacted the Chinese mission to the UN, to the Security Council, their New York mission for the Chinese government. I spoke to a Chinese executive secretary, a female, to the ambassador of China to the UN Security Council. They transferred me. I briefed her on the phone about our evidence, and I said, we need China's help. They tried to murder our child and cover it up. Okay? So she said to me, well, she gave me their email address. She said, Mr. Fitzgerald, can you send me the details by email? I said, yeah, sure. And then she said, well, look, send me what you can, and we'll look into it, and call me back in a week. I said, sure. Miss Lou, no problem. So a week later, I called back. I was transferred to Miss Liu, the executive secretary for the Chinese ambassador to the UN Security Council. I said, well, Miss Liu, I sent you the emails. Did you get them? I sent you some evidence. I didn't send you all of it. There's more, because they've been committing crimes against us up here and harassing and threatening us since I spoke with you. And she said, hold on a minute, I'll check. Miss Liu checks her computer. She never received a thing. Then my wife and I also decided to file with the High Commission of Human Rights anyway in Geneva. So I called the High Commission of Human Rights in Geneva overseas, and a gentleman there told me to send them an email. Okay? And I said, look, they're blocking me from sending any emails or exposing any part of our case to any outside institution of the UN. The government of Canada is doing this with the RCMP, including stealing our letters in the mail so that the Queen doesn't get them, Trump doesn't get them. We sent a letter to Barack Obama in the White House, which contained an application which he had to sign. They spent 12 weeks looking for it. It never got there because the government had someone at FedEx had handed it over to the government of Canada's RCMP. And I'll also tell you something else. I took evidence to CEJA here in Ottawa. They're a Jewish organization. They weren't in. I tried to call them to ask them if they'd take a look at it, because what happened here was Your government was applying Hitler's Nuremberg Laws and restrictions against my wife and I that he applied against the German people and the Jewish people. Okay, I ran into the Nuremberg Laws in some research I was doing on the Holocaust, and I read them all. Your government applied Hitler's Nuremberg Laws against my wife and I in the cover-up. That's what they did. They used all of them, actually, except for two. It's just, I'm giving you a short on this. That's all. I'm just telling you people what happened. The Canadian people need to know that your government are criminals. Your government are first-class criminals, murderers, and killers. And they've got assassins in your security across the country, police assassins, who work for them to attack you, to threaten you, to cover up your evidence. The government will turn all of the judges' courts against you and your evidence. They will ensure your evidence does not leave the country. And if they can't do that, they'll bribe foreign governments here not to say anything, which is what they did to us. They can't. Let me tell you something about the ICC. They never got our package of evidence. My wife went down to the Dutch embassy here in 2019-20, okay? She gave them the package. They said they would send it to the ICC. The ICC never got the package because the lead investigator there, Mark P. Dillon, he sent me an email and he said that he was going to archive the case. He wasn't closing the case, he was just archiving it because he said that he didn't receive any evidence from us. Okay, if they'd have received that package of evidence, which by the way was 2 inches thick, okay, very well organized and set up, every item was itemized on a list of the evidence against your government of Canada and your provinces. And he never got it. Because if he did, Mark P. Dillon would have emailed me from The Hague and said to me, Mr. Fitzgerald, we've received a package from the Dutch embassy in Ottawa. We've got it. We're going to look at it. He would have told me. He never did. In his last email, he said 2 communications. Those communications he got from the Dutch government in New York City, you see. So Mr. Trudeau stole our package of evidence that the Dutch government sent to the ICC. All right? That's what your government does. If you have criminal evidence against your government in Parliament Hill, which could cause them to be subsequently removed by King Charles, or formerly Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, prior to her passing on, God bless her soul. If the Queen had seen our evidence, and if the Queen found out that your entire government on Parliament Hill, all of them cut a deal to cover up all the crimes against my wife and I, okay, if the Queen had found out about that, Mr. Trudeau would be in jail right now, in prison, along with the Conservative Party and the NDP and the Bloc. And there'd be an interim government in your House of Commons right now who would be investigating all of these parties for criminal activity, including organized crime. Okay? Both within Canada and outside Canada. All right. So I think that's enough of the video now. I'll upload it to YouTube and, we'll see what happens. Okay, but I'm warning you, Trudeau. Okay? Understand this, people, and understand this, Government of Canada, and understand law enforcement this very second. Okay, I'm not done with you. So far, I've sat on my ass here for 5 years. I went to the Russian consulate once on my bicycle with signs, okay? Asking them for their help, and of course, President Vladimir Putin, I will tell you, is my leader. He's a good leader of Russia. He's a good person. He's a good president, okay? But like any other country, unfortunately, he's got some dirty birds in his embassy, okay? And I'm not going to get into that because I'm just not going to get into that. That's all, okay? You have embassies here. Let me just put it this way. You have embassies here in Ottawa, the international community. They got some, some gang members working for them in them. And they're connected to their colleagues here. We have Russian gangs here, East Indian gangs, Filipino gangs, African gangs, the Dominican Republic, South African gangs, the United Nations gang. Right? Every single country here that has an embassy in Ottawa, there are communities of these races of people who immigrated to Canada from all of these embassies here. And within them are gangs. Okay? Now that should tell you something. Your government goes through all international governments They use organized criminal corruption connections politically on an international scale to shut people up in Canada who have cases, and ours is the biggest. Our case is the biggest civil criminal case against the entire government of Canada, the opposition in Canada's history. They know that if our case goes public, they will, every one of them, and I'm not kidding, will be in prison. Okay? And I can tell you flat out that His Majesty King Charles, if this went public, I'll tell you right now, King Charles would contact the current Governor General of Canada and order him or her to shut down the House of Commons, that they're all under criminal investigation by King Charles. And I'm telling you this right now, folks, and I'm not lying. Anyways, I gotta go. I'm just posting this video. I'm giving you a warning, Trudeau. Okay, you and your buddies. Remember that I've done nothing yet. All I've done is talk on my phone with member states of the UN. I call the Russian Federation very loyally in New York City every Monday and Thursday, Mr. Prime Minister, and you're listening in on that, aren't you? Like you listen in to the Chinese. I call Ambassador Zhang of the Chinese mission in New York City, sometimes 5-10 times a day, leaving them messages, and they don't block my phone number, Trudeau, as you know. Your buddy there, Trudeau, folks, and your other buddy, Polyev. You see, I went to the Chinese consulate. They invited me. They wanted our evidence. And of course, when you're a Canadian citizen here in Ottawa and you call any embassy here, the RCMP are listening in, and the CSIS, right? So every time I called the Chinese consulate, and the gentleman there, the political gentleman's invited me to come down. They even invited me, they asked me, would you like to come into our embassy? And I made an appointment, but I didn't make it. They actually invited me in there. My excuse for not going was that I don't have a suit and a tie. That's actually why. But they're willing to accept our evidence over the phone. We see the RCMP were feeding this to Trudeau. They went to him and said, oh, you know what? The Chinese government's willing to accept their documents, Mr. Prime Minister. What do we do? Don't worry. I'm going to go to the Leaders Summit in Bali on a talk with President Xi and tell him that not to interfere in Canada's internal matters. That's exactly what he did because of me. That's what he did, folks. And then when Polyev and Trudeau decided to have Polyev attack the Chinese government in the House of Commons, publicly accusing them of having police stations, garbage lies, and so on, and interfering in Canada's elections. My, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? I seem to recall Donald Trump and Obama accusing the Russians, didn't they, of interfering in their federal elections? Canada likes to clone their number one Nazi ally in Washington, you see. The Chinese never did that. They didn't interfere in our elections. They didn't have public police stations. But Polyev went into the House of Commons drilling them and accusing them. You know why? Because of me. And they also kicked out a Chinese diplomat during the time I gave them the evidence. So you know what happened after I gave the Chinese the evidence? They got it. Well, I went down, I called them one day to leave a message, and the Chinese gentleman said to me on the phone, is this Daniel? I said, yes. He said, don't call this number again. And I thought, what's going on here? So then, about 6 months later, I was on my scooter, and I decided to go down to the Chinese consulate, maybe find out what they did with my material, whether they kept it or Canada stole it out of their mailbox like they would do. So I go down there very politely. I buzz them at their embassy on Patrick Street. I said, this is Daniel Fitzgerald. Just come by. Like, what'd you do with the evidence I gave you? Our little girl's catheter. Crime was in there that the government of Canada, the Liberals, covered up with the Conservatives. Can you please tell me, did you give it back? Did they come and take it? Then the gentleman at the other end says, leave now or I'll call the police. That's what they said. Okay. I ran up to the Russian embassy on my scooter. I almost hit a telephone pole. I was in shock. I couldn't believe what they did. And so I go up to the Russian embassy, I buzzed them, and I said, do you know what your colleagues, the Chinese here, just did? They told me to get off their property, or they called the police. I wasn't on their property. I was on the sidewalk, to begin with. But the reason why that happened wasn't because of anything I did. It was because of what Trudeau and Polyev did to them. All because of me. Okay? That's what Trudeau does. He runs around threatening other governments in Ottawa. If you give them any evidence and you're being followed by his Mounties, or they've hacked your phone, listening in on all your phone calls and reporting it to Trudeau and Polyev, hey, buddy, you're done. I was going to tell you, when I went to CSIS with some evidence, the story about our boat, Jacob's Goshen, which is named after Jacob in Genesis. Our boat was named after Jacob. It was being attacked by Balls Nazis in the Quebec police. We were sleeping at night. They put 5 gallons of water in my fuel tank. We were sleeping. The police. Okay? Nazis. These are Nazis, by the way. So I thought, CJ was emailing me. They're sending me emails to my Gmail, and I thought, I talked to my wife, said, Jen, let's give them some of the evidence. I tried to call their office. They're never open downtown in Ottawa, to tell them I'd like to come down and give them a partial package of our case. And so I go down there. Anyway, I go to the 6th floor. The office is closed. I had the package with me. So I just kind of pushed it under their door. I just kind of pushed as far as I could. 2 weeks later, I called them in Toronto, and I spoke to their press office lady. I said to her, my name's Daniel Fitzgerald. I dropped a package off at your office here in Ottawa. Did you people get it? It's evidence. Oh, yes, we did. And I said, well, what did you do with it? Did you know? She said, oh, we gave it over to our security. I said, you have internal security? And then you know what she said to me? She said, national security. See, because the police are following me everywhere with my evidence here in Ottawa. Everywhere I go, they're following me in ghost cars. So and then when my wife was taking the evidence package for the ICC, she walked to the Dutch government here. They're on the 20th floor at Constitution Square to send it to The Hague. She was followed by the RCMP in an Ottawa police car. Okay, so we know who's been covering up our evidence for your Parliament Hill and the province of Ontario, Quebec, don't we, Canada? Do I need to say more? YouTube, are you going to let Canada limit people who can see this video? Right? Do you know that's something else they've been doing, folks? You know what they've been doing? Limiting my videos. Do you know that Trudeau won't let anyone outside the country see my videos against his government? Do you know that? Do you know that I have videos posted from 3 years ago describing the Nurmemburg Laws? You can look it up on YouTube. It's titled Daniel and Jennifer Fitzgerald's Case Against the Government of Canada and the Police. You look that up, okay? You know how many views I've gotten in 3 years on that video? What is it, 35 or 40? Well, the videos underneath me on the same subject matter, Nazism and the Reich, okay, and the SS, that uploaded their videos approximately 2 or 3 years ago, the same time I did, they got 10,000 views. Would you like to explain that, Mr. Trudeau? Would you and your government like to explain, Mr. Prime Minister, how you've been censoring my wife and I for years, blocking our videos from YouTube, Mr. Prime Minister, blocking them, Mr. Prime Minister, from other people in other countries like The Hague, the United States? Let me give you folks another story. I sent 20 documents to Rabbi Marvin Heyer of Simon Wiesenthal International in Beverly Hills in California. I took photographs with my iPhone camera, and the documents were legible. You could read them from the photographs. I sent 20 of the worst documents I have in my inventory against the Canadian government, and I sent them by email to Simon Wiesenthal Center in Beverly Hills. I told the secretary that answers the phone there, the receptionist, I'd be sending them. She said, call me back on Monday. I did. I said, did you receive them? She said, hold on, I'll check. They never received them. You know why? You see, Trudeau's police, every time we send an email, Mr. Trudeau's RCMP or Mounties, they're capturing my emails on their way out, right? And making sure that there's any evidence in them against Canada that I'm trying to bring to the attention of some institution outside of Canada, the emails don't get there. They're using a third party. They're using, a second party as a middleman blocking my emails. Do you understand? That's what Trudeau and his government and Mounties have been up to. Yeah. Anyways, I gotta go, you folks. I'll let you know, and I'm going to warn you again, Mr. Prime Minister, and your government, that you're guilty, Mr. Prime Minister, of criminal acts against my wife and I and our property and our children. And you're guilty of covering up, Mr. Prime Minister, those criminal acts by the Crown. You're guilty, and so are you, Polyev, and so are you, Mr. Singh. All of them. They're all guilty. And like I said, Justin, I haven't done anything yet, Mr. Prime Minister. I've sat my ass in this house for 5 years here in Vanier, where you parked my wife and I to be what? Manicured by the bikers, Mr. Prime Minister. Tell me, Mr. Prime Minister, how is it that your law enforcement knows all our conversations in our house? And they're mentioning it Mr. Prime Minister, in our horoscopes under Sagittarius and Aries on MSN? How is it, Mr. Prime Minister, the crystal ballers at MSN's horoscopes under Sagittarius and Aries? How is it they seem to know the things we're talking about in our home, Justin? You got a lot of explaining to do, Mr. Prime Minister, you and your flunkies. I want you people gone. You understand, Justin? I want you in prison. As you've been illegally, Mr. Prime Minister, holding my wife and I in exile and constantly threatening us with arrest covertly through my iPhone Pro 12. And by the way, folks, all your iPhone Pro 12s, they can hack them like butter. They know everything you're saying, everything you're doing. The police can sit and watch you and your wife having sex in your houses through your flat screen TVs. They can hack all of your faxes. They hack all of the lawyers in Ottawa. They know who all their clients are. They can steal faxes. You can send a fax to somebody, the police will intercept it. Do you know that? Nothing you do is private. It's far worse than you freedom protesters and you, Miss Litch, and you, Mr. Greenspan, know of. And I asked Greenspan to represent my wife and I. Do you know that? He could take down the Trudeau government in 2 months flat. Mr. Greenspan, I could have gotten a settlement for the government had you taken our case for my wife and I. I could have gotten $100 million loss, $100 million settlement, Mr. Greenspan, and you know it. Why are you protecting the government, Lawrence? And how about you, Mr. Deschamps, Paul Deschamps? I came to you too, do you recall? Do you? Scared, are we? What are you lawyers here in Ottawa, what? You have a contract with the government, your little monthly welfare check when business is bad? Or let me guess, our case is in conflict with some lawyer in your offices that does corporate law for the government. Your monthly welfare check from them. Is that why you didn't want to take our case? Or was it, you big fancy lawyers here in Ottawa, was it because you're scared that your families will get threatened by the government of Canada's Italian mafia in uniform or their street thugs? Well, I agree with you. Because they would threaten you and your families for representing me and my wife. Or Trudeau would put your law firm out of business. Is that what you're scared of, Mr. Lawrence Greenspan? After all, Mr. Greenspan, I mean, you're fighting against the government, against Miss Litch. I'd like to remind you people regarding Miss Litch, she's innocent. What surprises me about the case, though, and Miss Litch having to go to court under criminal charge is because, think of it this way, right? The Crown, in the case against Miss Litch, I believe it's the province of Ontario, isn't it? Isn't the Crown attorney against Miss Litch? Doesn't she work for Doug Ford as Attorney General? Or, excuse me, is it a federal criminal case against Miss Litch? I'm sorry, am I mistaken here? Well, why didn't they arrest Poilievre when he was walking with the protesters, yet they arrest Miss Litch? Didn't he commit a crime too, Justin? Pierre Poilievre? How about you, Mr. Poilievre? Don't you think, Poilievre, when you were walking with the protesters, that Trudeau should have had you arrested and have you charged as well for being, Mr. Poilievre, a Nazi protester? What is it Trudeau said? Oh, they're all white supremacists. Well, let me tell you, folks, something about the freedom protests, okay? As a matter of fact, Trudeau was in the House of Commons stating that the ones with swastikas were white supremacists. Wasn't that what you were saying, Justin? You shook the hands of a Nazi and said, thank you for coming, didn't you? You did, Mr. Prime Minister. Well, let me just clarify some things about the Nazis with swastikas that Trudeau claims were Nazis, white supremacists. Well, one of those apparent Nazis was from Eastern Europe, and one of the freedom protest organizers went up and talked to him and said, what are you doing here with a Nazi swastika? And he said, I don't want to see Canada's government turn Canada into a Nazi state. That's what he sent to her, or to the organizer. I saw the video, by the way. It was on video. Okay, so, like I say to the Canadian people, your government holds my wife and I here in exile, has restricted our ability to get evidence outside the country. Your government has RCMP and Ottawa Police Service following us everywhere, trying to block our evidence. They have stolen our mail. They have blocked our outgoing emails on our case. What else have you constables done in violation of our rights under the Charter of Civil Rights? Okay? And you're not going to get away with it, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm going to tell you that right now. Like I said, Justin, all I've done, Mr. Prime Minister, is sit in this chair here calling for 5 years. You haven't seen me in action yet, Mr. Prime Minister. This whole city, Mr. Prime Minister, and all these embassies, they're going to know everything you've done. And your government on Parliament Hill, and you're going to be Tostitos. Wait till King Charles finds out, Justin. He is going to find out. I also had a comment from one of the royals today in London. The address was Her Majesty 1. It was, the address of the comment to me was at Her Majesty 1. The numeral 1. I believe it came from the royal family. They know who I am. After all, I kept pressing the Russian Federation in New York by telephone to at least have the courtesy to let King Charles know what Mr. Trudeau and his opposition parties have been doing to my wife and I for the past how many years, Justin? How many years, Mr. Prime Minister? Would you like to tell the Canadian people, Mr. Prime Minister, who the pale white talls are that you've recruited? Haven't you people in Canada seen these cops in uniform in the RCMP and across the country in your communities? These pale, tall white ones. Do you notice how they can't tan? Do you notice how they don't tan? Well, there's a reason for that. But I'll tell you what, I won't break it to you. Let me just put it to you this way. I briefed the Chinese ambassador to the UN in numerous phone calls, leaving him messages on his voicemail at 212-655-6195. And also, I want to tell you something else. When the Chinese consulate told me to leave because they called the police, the Chinese ambassador found out. He blocked my phone number for quite a while. I couldn't call his mission in New York. There was a recording saying this person doesn't want to talk to you or something like that. So I called the Russian Federation in New York and I told them, look, you need to talk to your Chinese friends. They're blocking my calls. That's not fair. But what in reality happened is the embassy of China did get our evidence. And it took them time, but they read it, you see. And it's very serious. And after they read it, our evidence, and after the Russians talked to them, I guess the Russians did talk to them and told them we gave them some pretty serious stuff against the Canadian government that could have them all in prison, hated by the entire international community forever. Our evidence would have all of your government of Canada, they would not be allowed landing rights at any more leader summits. Your entire government on Parliament Hill and all your opposition members, they would not be able to land in any country. If these foreign governments in the international community, if our case went public, no one on Parliament Hill or the provinces would be allowed in any country. They won't let them in. Because your governments have covered up criminal acts against my wife and I, our children. Okay, folks, all our property. And trying to intimidate us all the time, especially my poor wife. They're intimidating her downtown. It's terrible. It just goes on and on. But not for long, Trudeau. Like I said, I've been sitting on my ass now for 5 years, Mr. Prime Minister. Do you understand? And when I go out there, Mr. Prime Minister, I'm going to grab you by the tail, you and your entire government. I'm not going to let go until the entire city and international community here knows everything that you did. And your phone's ringing off the hook with threats, Mr. Prime Minister, from the UN against your government for what you've done. And you bite that one, Trudeau, and bite it hard. Do you understand? We'll see. Anyways, I got to go. Shalom. God bless all of you. And ending, I'd like to say that my heart goes out to, I think about the children of Gaza. I think about the little babies they killed. I think about, and it puts me in tears, thinking that, you know, a Jew who's related to me by blood, Mr. Netanyahu, would actually murder Palestinian mothers who are pregnant with little children in their wombs. That his detention center guards would rape Palestinian women and beat them. You know, and when you think that the Jewish state, the most supposedly a landmark religious site of the whole world, historically, that they could commit and murder newborn children inside Palestinian mothers' wombs by killing the mother, and then the doctors taking these dead Palestinian women, seeing their little babies' hearts still beating in their wombs, and they cut them out and try and save them, and the babies died. See, that's what Mr. Polyev is in Harper. Monsters. At least Trudeau's a monster too, but I will be fair about this because I'm a religious Christian Jew. At least Trudeau is against that. At least he's against the murders of these people. I do give him a brownie point for that, but Mr. Prime Minister, you made no brownie points with me at all for what you have done. And your defense of these innocent people is a good thing, Mr. Prime Minister, but you know what, Justin? Defense starts at home, Justin, with your victims. Not other victims of other governments, Mr. Prime Minister. You start by having compassion, Mr. Prime Minister, and apologizing to the victims here at home first. You know what I mean? Shalom.